The Wherryman's Way is a 35-mile long-distance trail right across the Norfolk Broads National Park. The route's official trailhead is at the railway station and follows the River Wensum briefly to the nearby village of Trouse. The route passes Whitlingham Country Park and crosses open countryside to Bramerton Staithe, where the River Yare is followed to Surlingham. A brief detour off the route leads to the ruins of St Saviour's Church before rejoining the riverbank path around RSPB Surlingham Church Marsh National Nature Reserve. Coldham Hall is bypassed to join a track past the Ted Ellis Nature Reserve and into the village of Rockland St Mary and the end of the first day along the trail. The busy, historic streets of Norwich mark the start of the 35-mile long-distance trail called the Wherryman's Way. The way links Norwich to the coastal town of Great Yarmouth by following the River Yare as close as possible. The route gets its name from the wherry, a large cargo-carrying barge that once was common all over the Norfolk Broads. Most public transport links stop at the city centre by the spectacular 11th century Norman castle, surrounded by ample shops to top up on supplies and walking gear before heading down the hill to the official trailhead at the train station. The path crosses the River Wensum to arrive at the spectacular Grade 2 listed railway station, dating to 1886. From here the Wensum is rejoined and followed past the Riverside Entertainment Area. It's worth noting that the new Riverside apartments across the water were built on the site of St Michael's Church and Priory, one of many priories around Norwich. The Wherryman's Way leaves the River Wensum at Carrow Road football ground, but it's worth taking a little detour to two of the city wall towers. Collectively, these two are known as the Boom Towers. The nearest is known as the Devil's Tower and appears to have deliberately been built separate from the city wall, with its sole purpose to carry the iron staple for the chain which spanned the river. The towers are listed as a scheduled ancient monument and date to the 14th century. The Wherryman's Way continues out of the city, past the Coleman's Mustard Factory, which was built on the site of a Benedictine priory founded in the 12th century, and heads over the main Norwich to London train line. It's here that the route is first introduced to the River Yare, which is the main river followed to the coast. Sitting alongside the river is St Andrew's Church, a Grade 1 listed building dating back to the 13th century, and with numerous alterations through the years. Following Whitlingham Lane, the route eventually turns left and enters Whitlingham Country Park. This fantastic recreational area is home to several lakes, nature trails and some rare species of wildlife. Right alongside the path you may notice the enigmatic ruins of Trouse Newton Hall. This was once the country house for the priors of Norwich, later the deans after the dissolution, and then later again converted into a farmhouse. The building was originally built in the mid-15th century and largely demolished in 1860. As you begin to leave Whitlingham Country Park, there are some unusual mounds and earthworks in the woodlands alongside. These old gravel pits have provided evidence of ancient extinct mammals, as well as humans living in the area over 12,000 years ago. Just before heading under the A47 dual carriageway, up to the right you may notice more enigmatic ruins on the hilltop. These are the remains of St Andrew's Church dating back to the 14th century and fell into disrepair sometime around 1630. The western end of the church once had a tower which sadly collapsed in 1940. Just beyond the A47, the Wherryman's Way passes probably one of the least pleasant sections on the entire route. The massive sewage works is a real eyesore, and it's worth speeding past and breathing just with your mouth until you reach the other side of the site. But as you do, the path begins a gentle ascent to the highest point on the entire walk at 21 metres above sea level. Now, this might not sound like much, but when the landscape around you is much flatter, the view is really excellent. The Wood's End at Bramerton Staithe is the first sign of civilization since leaving Norwich several miles back, and offers visitors with refreshments and a warming, friendly atmosphere. Following the trail close to the River Yare, the path eventually arrives at Surlingham, a tiny village of only 725 inhabitants, spread out over several square miles. The round-towered church of St Mary is the first of several historic features in the village. Dating to the early 13th century, this church had undergone many alterations and repairs over the years, giving it a rather unique patchwork appearance. Just a few hundred metres off the trail, there are also the remains of St Saviour's Church, which sits on a slight hill overlooking the spectacular marshes to the north. The ruins are hard to date, but believed to originate from the 12th century, and once supported a tower. It is documented that the church has been out of use since 1705, although this has not stopped more recent burials in the churchyard, including that of the famous naturalist Ted Ellis. Sitting just to the north of the ruins is the spectacular RSPB Surlingham Church Marsh Nature Reserve. This 68-acre wetland reserve is home to some of Britain's rarest species, including hobby, kingfisher and the majestic marsh harrier. The trail skirts the entire northern edge of the reserve to arrive at a viewing platform which provides shelter, seating and a perfect place for a little rest, lunch and some wildlife watching. For those wanting to buy some hot food along the trail, just a few minutes walk further along the path arrives at the ferry house, which marks a point where a ferry once crossed into Posek on the other side of the river, and provides a wide range of food and drink for visitors. A short walk out and back to the River Yare visits Coldham Hall, another pub, this one dating to 1802, and provides more choice of food and drink for those walking the trail or just exploring the area. The final leg to the finishing point on the first day along the Wherryman's Way passes the Ted Ellis National Nature Reserve. This spectacular 128-acre wetland reserve is home to some rare species of birds and insects, and if time allows, a leisurely stroll along one of the numerous trails is highly recommended. As you continue south towards the village of Rockland St Mary, the route climbs a little to a height of about 10 metres over the surrounding marsh, and allows a view across the field to Rockland Broad, a 50-acre broad that is explored closer and in greater detail on the next stretch of the Wherryman's Way. As you enter the village of Rockland St Mary, there is a single bed and breakfast at Oxnead House, and a local pub called the New Inn, which overlooks the Staithe and marks the end of the day's walk. Good morning and welcome to the second day of the Wherryman's Way. As you can see behind me here, just through the trees, is the River Yare, and I've just passed Rockland Broad and Short Dyke. Now Rockland Broad is a beautiful, beautiful open piece of water. It's the location where they actually sunk some wherries, and it is a national nature reserve. It's owned by the RSPB, and there is a hyde that overlooks the Broad, so it's a lovely place to sit down and just enjoy the view. Just round the corner though, I've never been there before, was a lovely bench just overlooking the Broad as well, so there's a couple of spots to enjoy the area. So I'm on about 11 miles today, following the River Yare most of the way, a little short inland section near Langley, and then I'm going to be going past Hardley Flood and into Loddon for an overnight stay there. Now I think there might be a diversion in place around Hardley Flood because of footpath closures. Some bridges have collapsed, I think, and the riverbank's been eroded too much, and they're still doing repair work, so it might not be an official part of the route there, but it is the official diversion. So it's gonna be a really nice day. 20 degrees, lovely sunshine, and we've already seen so much wildlife. I can see 2 deer just over here in the field, some swans down there. We've seen some shell duck, grebes, and the first bird we saw was a marsh harrier that flew over right in the centre of Rockland. So just on the other side of the river, you might be able to make out a chimney, and that is inside Strumpshaw Fair Nature Reserve, which is owned and managed by the RSPB, and that forms part of a massive network of nature reserves, which is called the Mid-Yare National Nature Reserve. Now I'm following the River Yare at the moment, and it just takes me round to the Beauchamp Arms, which is also the stays at Claxton. So I've just left the Beauchamp Arms behind me, and I've just joined this little tiny country lane which leads me into the village of Langley, and this is the most considerable part of road walking on the entire day. Now behind me over here, I'm getting some views over to Old Buckenham Ferry Drainage Mill, which was the location of a ferry linked across to Buckenham on the other side, and that was closed well over 100 years ago. I can't find any history on the mill itself, but it's probably dated to around the 19th century, and it doesn't appear to be listed. Langley really is a tiny little village, and it doesn't have a pub or a shop or anything. What it does have is Langley Abbey Estate, which you can see just through the bush here. There's a lovely cafe set within the ruins of the 12th century abbey. Now it was dated to 1195, that's when it was founded, and all the upstanding remains are Grade 1 listed, with the whole area being a scheduled ancient monument. It's an absolutely beautiful place to visit, and if you're in the Southern Broads, you must stop there. Sadly for me it's closed today, but do allow some time just to have a venture in if it is open. So after following the road for about a mile or so and passing through Langley, I've finally rejoined the riverbank, and I've got a lovely view of a marsh harrier just gliding over the marshes. Sadly it's backed by the eyesore that is Cantley Sugar Factory, but look at that, there's a male marsh harrier and then a great crested grebe in the water as well, so it's absolutely gorgeous. So we've just arrived on the opposite bank to Cantley, and you can see the Reed Cutter Arms just there, which is a lovely waterside pub, really popular with boaters during the summer months. But the peace and the quiet really is broken by this great monstrosity, Cantley Sugar Factory. It's just a gentle, well, loud rumble really in the background. You can't really hear any birds singing or anything like that. Probably the worst section of the entire walk, this quarter of a mile past the factory. So I've come about a mile along the riverbank since the sugar factory, and I've arrived at Hardley Mill with its small visitor centre, which is open during high season. But the mill itself is Grade 2 listed. It dates to 1874 and stands 4 stories high. And what's special about this one is that it's been so fantastically restored. There are very few mills in Norfolk that look like this. Most of them stand as just derelict ruins. As you're walking along this riverbank footpath, always have a look inland and away from the river. So there's a pool just over here. There's 2 shelduck, there's some black-headed gulls, but just at the back there's actually a greenshank. Now greenshanks are wading birds, and most of the time there's only around 500, maybe 800 in the country at any one time, and most commonly seen during migratory periods, so right now in spring and also in the autumn. So I'm just following the edge of Hardley Staithe here at the moment. This is the access dike to it. And what's unusual is the fact that there is no public mooring whatsoever. Every single berth is private. Now it's known that this dike here was cut between 1810 and 1840, but it replaced an older one. So if I just show you this side, apparently an older, more winding, sort of meandering cut existed just along here up to the River Yare, and that was potentially dug in Saxon times. It provided access from the River Yare up to the village, and you can see the church just on the skyline up there. Now, it's known that the village did have a pub at one point, numerous cottages and warehouses, but now it's pretty much empty. There is a church, there's a few houses and a farm. But if you do want to explore this area and you're coming by boat, you're going to have to moor at either Loddon over that way or Langley over there and then walk down. So just behind me over there you can see Limpenhoe Drainage Mill. Now this one is Grade 2 listed and dates to the mid-19th century, so a very similar age to Hardley Mill. Now this one's in a much more sorry state, but as you can see they are doing some restoration works to it, so in the coming years it will look far better. So I'm just approaching Hardley Cross. Now this is a scheduled ancient monument and Grade 2 listed building that dates to the 16th century and sits right alongside the River Yare. Now it actually marks the boundary between the Corporation of Norwich, which is on my side at the moment, and then the borough of Great Yarmouth just on the other side. So I've had to leave the river shed behind me. It's just down by those vans over there, so there is a footpath closure in place, so I've had to take this detour off as diversion. And looking at the signposts, this has been an official diversion for some time, but they are doing some work over there, so fingers crossed the original route will be open at some point. Now, the good thing about taking this little diversion is you get a fantastic view of Hardley Hall. Now this is a Grade 2 star listed hall that dates to the mid or late 16th century, and the unusual thing is it's built from stone, and most houses around here are either built from brick or wood. So I've just left Hardley Hall behind me over there, and I've gained a little bit of height, so I can actually see down onto Hardley Flood just over here. Now, it's a nature reserve and a site of special scientific interest, covering an area of just over 120 acres. Now, the original route actually snakes its way along the edge of the nature reserve, but this temporary diversion still gives you quite a nice view. So I've just left this lovely area of woodland behind me, and I'm about to join the road, which then descends down into Chedgrave. Now, there is a pub and numerous shops there, but it is also only a quarter of a mile to Loddon, which is my final destination for today. Now, I wasn't aware of this, but the Wherryman's Way actually has come off the road that goes down into Chedgrave, which I thought it followed all the way into the village, and has joined this trackway here, which heads along and actually rejoins the original Wherryman's Way just this side of, so that's Loddon side of Hardley Flood. There I'll rejoin the River Chet, and then I'll turn right and follow that into Chedgrave and then down into my final destination of Loddon. Taken one tiny little detour off the route, and that is to check out All Saints Church here in Chedgrave. Now, it's believed that this church dates to the 12th century, but there is potential that the tower itself could date to even earlier, perhaps the late 11th century. Hello and welcome to the third and final day along my Wherryman's Way adventure. Now, I've just left Loddon behind me with its fantastic Grade 1 listed Church of Holy Trinity, which dates to the late 15th century, and I've got about 5 miles to go before I get to Reedham, which is my next settlement, and then it's river all the way along until I join Braden Water at Burney Arms, where there used to be a pub but sadly there no longer is, and the spectacular Burney Arms Mill, which should look spectacular in the sun. And then I follow Braden Water all the way to the end at Great Yarmouth. Now I've just arrived in the tiny hamlet of Heckingham, which consists of only a couple of houses and a farm or two. But here is the church of St Gregory. St Gregory's church dates to the 12th century and is Grade 1 listed, and it has a lovely round tower. So the Wherryman's Way actually follows country lanes down to Reedham Ferry, and I'm on a slightly higher ridge of land, and I've had a view to Reedham itself, and I can also see Hardley Mill that I passed yesterday. I saw Hardley Flood earlier. I can see Hardley Church, and just ahead is Norton Mill. Now I don't think it's listed, but it dates to 1863 and has had some restorations done. Now, the mill itself is actually only about 100 metres or so in a straight line away from Hardley Cross, where I was at yesterday. But you have to take this sort of 7-mile detour all the way inland and then back out again, because there's no crossing of the river there. So I'm just coming up to Reedham Ferry now, and it's actually the only place you can cross the river between Great Yarmouth and Norwich. Now historically there used to be lots of passenger ferries at numerous places, all of which have closed, and I say this is the only one that is now operational. Just be prepared that you do have to pay to use it. I think for passengers at the moment it's only 50p. So I've just crossed the river at Reedham Ferry, and historically the route actually used to follow the riverbank just over here. Now you can see there's still some gates over there, and it went in front of this lovely mill. Now there's a public right of way all the way up to the houses, but there's a short section of permissive footpath, and sadly that was closed a couple of years ago, so they've had to divert the route along the road into Reedham now. Reedham really is a lovely little village with a shop, a couple of pubs and also a train station. So if you wanted to, you could end your third day here and use the train service to either Great Yarmouth or Norwich to stay overnight. just as you leave Reedham, you notice that over here the river actually splits. Now the right hand fork is called Haddiscoe New Cut, and it was dug in 1833 to provide a more direct route from Lowestoft to Norwich. So the riverbank path to Burney Arms follows a couple of miles of this riverbank here. I can see Reedham behind me and Reedham Church just over here. And if I show you this way, it's roughly 2 miles to the halfway point at Polkey's Mill just there. And then if you look further round, right on the horizon, you might be able to make out Burney Arms. That's about 4 miles from Reedham. And then it's probably another 4.5 miles from there to Great Yarmouth. So when walking this section, you'll notice the vast areas of reed bed on the right, which border the river. Now they actually cut the reeds, you can see here, on a cycle every few years. And it stops the river becoming clogged up with the reed. And it also provides a lovely area for redshank and oyster catcher to feed, as it creates these shallow pools. So roughly 2 miles from Reedham, and you arrive here at 7 Mile House, which looks like it probably might have been an old pub or something like that with a public key, which closed long ago, but I can't be sure. And you've got Polkey's Mill here. This is Grade 2 star listed and dates to the mid-19th century. Now what's different about this mill is that it actually rotated clockwise rather than anti-clockwise, and the interior has been recently restored, which is why it's been given that extra level of protection. Very close by, you've got Cadger's Mill as well, which is mid-19th century and Grade 2 listed. Clearly not in as good condition with no sails. And I've also noticed way over the back of there, there's actually a third mill. So there's 3 mills all very close to each other. But I can't find any history on this small one, which only looks like it's 2 or 3 stories high with no cap and no sails. But it's a lovely area, and it's only 2 more miles until I get to Burney Arms. I've come a couple of hundred metres since Cadger's and Polkey's Mill just over there, and you come across another mill, but this one's in a far poorer condition. So this one is Haddiscoe Mill. It actually marks 6 Mile House, and that was 7 Mile House, although I'm not convinced there's a mile between them. The mill is Grade 2 listed and dates to the mid-19th century and stands at about 4 stories high. I can see still some of the original workings and stuff near the cap, but it is in a very, very sorry state. Getting very close now to Burney Arms Mill, and I can see it just around the corner. But first there's one more mill before I reach there, and that is Red Mill, just ahead over there. So Red Mill dates to the late 19th century and is Grade 2 listed and stands at 4 stories tall, so it's very similar to all the other mills that are along this stretch of river. Right next door is Raven Hall. That's also Grade 2 listed and has been dated to 1700. So it's a particularly old house to be right down on the riverbank. So I've just arrived here at Burney Arms Mill, and you can see it is truly enormous. I think it stands at 71 feet high and is reportedly one of the tallest windmills in Norfolk, although there is one mill over at Sutton which I think might be slightly taller, though it's never officially been measured. So the mill is a scheduled ancient monument and is owned and managed by English Heritage. It is one of the most spectacular mills that you'll see in Norfolk. Just behind me now you can see the old pub at Burney Arms, and sadly it has closed. It closed a few years ago and it looks rather derelict at the moment, and I don't think there's any plans for it to be reopened. Now when you are walking this section though along the Burney Arms, take a look to the other side of the river. So it's lit up at the moment in the sunlight, although it's now going into the shade. There is a Roman fort up there. That is at Borough Castle. Now if you want to explore that, the Angles Way, which goes from Great Yarmouth all the way to Thetford, heads right past it. Now the fort, although some of it has been washed away because of erosion, has some of the tallest and most intact Roman walls in the country. It dates to I think the 2nd or 3rd century and was one of a series of forts along the shore, including one just up the road at Caister-on-Sea, one right round on the Norfolk coast at Brancaster, and then further down at things like Felixstowe. That was also the site of a Norman Motte and Bailey castle as well, hence the name Borough Castle. Now, in the Norman times, or around the 12th century, the Normans reused the Roman walls that were already present as part of the castle defences. And just think, at that point, when the Normans built the castle, the walls themselves were already nearly 1,000 years old. And it is a truly lovely place to go and visit. So just as I leave Burney Arms, I'm coming up to the very southern end of Breydon Water. Now Breydon Water is part of a massive nature reserve that's owned and managed by the RSPB, and the water itself covers an area I think of 1,200 acres. Now it is tidal, and at low tide you get vast areas of mudflats which are home to thousands and thousands of birds. Especially in the winter period, it's an internationally important site for overwintering waterfowl. So strolling out alongside Breydon Water here is a prime example of the difference in water height against land height. The tide is in at the moment, but the water level would easily be 1 metre, perhaps even 2 metres deep if it was allowed to breach these defences, and it would go at least 4 or 5 miles inland, all the way over to Acle and Halvergate on the other side of Burney Marshes here. So all this reclaimed land will be gone. Imagine it being like Poole Harbour, where you'd have a navigable channel, but then the outer stretches of the estuary will be shallow and salt marsh. So this here is Lockgate Drainage Mill. It's another Grade 2 listed mill that stands 4 stories high and dates to the late 19th century. Now this is actually the last mill encountered on the entire walk. I've got about 3.5 miles left along the estuary with open marshes on my left and vast open water on my right. I've got flocks of birds going up and down. I've got oyster catchers, I can hear redshanks, and I've got this as company until the end of the walk. Still working my way alongside Breydon Water, and I've just come to this area of salt marsh. You can see how the tide has started to go out and revealing this flat mud area here. Now it's really important not to rush this last section, because within these little pools and channels are the best places to see some of the wading birds. I've seen, I say, oyster catchers. There's some sitting on a bank over here. I've seen whimbrel, I've seen curlew, redshank. There's also a chance to see things like grey plover and golden plover, and you tend to see those in bigger flocks. So I can also make out Haven Bridge just over there and the church tower in Great Yarmouth. Now just behind Haven Bridge is the train station, which marks the official end of the Wherryman's Way. So I'm coming up to the final little stretch of the walk. There's the rumble of the A47 Acle straight behind me, and then just ahead I've got Breydon Water and then Breydon Bridge over there. So I'm going to follow this bank all the way round, past an RSPB bird hide which I've spotted over there, and then there's a little supermarket the other side, and then the train station. So this is it, the train station in Great Yarmouth, marking the official end of my Wherryman's Way adventure. It's been fantastic, starting in Norwich and meandering my way along the River Yare, stopping at Rockland St Mary and Loddon before finally arriving here in Great Yarmouth. It's a route that may not have all the views, but it is rich in history and overflowing with wildlife. It really is a superb walk, and surely one of the best riverside walks in England.